Was this the plate of brass which the 16th century explorer Sir Francis Drake left on the coast of America? This fossil changed science's idea of evolution, but was it faked like this? Did two schoolboys fool the world with this decorated bone, or is it a masterpiece of Stone Age art? Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001 and inventor of the communications satellite. Now in retreat in Sri Lanka, he ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
I'm visiting a piece of old England. All the classic ingredients are here. The golf course with its sweeping green links, a country club with all the trappings, a red brick post office, and an Anglican church. And, as in any English suburb, the houses are built in an eccentric mixture of styles: Gothic, late Victorian, and even stockbroker Tudor. Yet this isn't England. I haven't left Sri Lanka. This is Neuralia, a town built as a hilltop health resort by the British explorer Sir Samuel Baker in the 19th century. Baker imported almost everything except the climate: vegetables, shrubs, sheep, cows, a pack of foxhounds, and even a blacksmith. It's a brilliant fake, but it's not intended to fool anybody. It is not always so easy to distinguish between a fake and the real thing, as museums all over the world have discovered, sometimes to their cost.
In 1579, Sir Francis Drake was circling the world. He needed to stop to repair his ship. His chaplain's account of the voyage says that Drake landed somewhere on the west coast of America. In a small bay, he came ashore and put up a brass plate claiming the land for Queen Elizabeth. He named the place Nova Albion, or New Britain.
This looked like the place, Jeff.
It was around here. It could have been a little further over.
These two men believed that they could be standing on the very spot where Drake staked his claim with the brass plate. One of them, George Jefferson, is convinced this is the place. He has spent years trying to prove it. The other, Jefferson Graves, could unwittingly once have held the proof in his hand. In the early 1930s, as a child, he came to this spot for a picnic with his parents and a friend. He was digging in the soil when something caught his eye.
All of a sudden, I saw something shiny. And I ran over and started digging in that place, and pretty soon this shiny thing was getting bigger and bigger, and I started pulling at it, and I was trying to get it out, and I couldn't figure it out, and it looked like something strange.
He says he picked up a rectangular brass plate. On the way home in the car, Jefferson was examining the strange markings on it. Suddenly, his friend grabbed the plate and threw it out of the window. The parents drove on, and that would have been the end. But in 1936, the plate turned up again. It was found in Marin County and passed through a chain of hands until it came here to the Bancroft Library at Berkeley. Historian Dr. Herbert Bolton was director of the Bancroft. He was delighted. For years, he told his students how thrilling it would be if Drake's plate of brass turned up, and suddenly it had been found and was in his care. He declared it authentic, placed it in his library, and paid a reward to the finder. Bolton's reputation was so great that no one thought to question his declaration. But when he died, doubts started to creep in. Specialists in Elizabethan English were suspicious of the wording. The plate of brass was re-examined.
Unfortunately, we don't find this artifact terribly convincing. There are too many things wrong with it. At first glance, the lettering is quite peculiar. The way of referring to the Queen, for example, is odd. It says, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of England, which is not the way anyone in the 16th century would have referred to the monarch. It would have been Elizabeth by the grace of God, Queen of England, or some such formula, but certainly not this. The letter forms as well are really quite curious. The way an N is made, simply as not with a diagonal as we would expect, but with a bar across the top. In context, you can see it's an N, but it looks for all the world like a Greek pi.
Once the scholars had voiced their doubts, the scientists were called in. Dr. Frank Azzaro holds the Nobel Prize for his work in chemistry. In 1977, he was asked to look at the metal from which the plate was made. He and his team drilled brass from the side of it and analysed what they found.
Our findings do not tell us what the age of the plate is, but what we did find out was that it was so extremely pure in the extraneous elements that we looked for that it could not have been made in Drake's time. The plate of brass is made from copper and zinc. They did not have copper of that purity available in Drake's time. Zinc of that purity was not available in Drake's time, and they did not have the technology to make the composition of the plate of brass at that time.
Not only was the brass too pure, but the plate seemed to have been made using modern techniques. In the 16th century, brass was hammered into shape, but this plate bore all the signs of a 20th century rolling mill. It was a standard thickness throughout.
The plate of brass is very close to 1/8 of an inch thick. It's homogeneous to 1/1000th of an inch. Within our ability to measure, it corresponds exactly with the specifications for the number 8 gauge of the American wire gauge standard used in the 1930s.
Back at Agate Beach, George Epperson's faith is undaunted by science or scholars. He's sure that the log of Drake's explorations and the description of the bay where he came ashore point to this place. With his metal detector, he's combed every inch of the sand, looking for other things Drake may have left.
Oh, I love detecting down here, and I kind of hear murmurs out in the ocean like voices, and there's sea dogs that come around and keep me company. It's sometimes a little spooky, but very interesting. I love it.
If, as he believes, the plate of brass is genuine, then this would indeed be a historic place. He swore never to give up his campaign to have it recognised.
This is our country's oldest and rarest document, even rarer than the Constitution of America. And it's very historic and should be acknowledged.
But if he's wrong, and the scientists have proved it a fake, how could the hoax have happened? At Berkeley, they think they know. They blame a history professor with a little too much enthusiasm.
He used to say in class that Drake's plate must be out there waiting to be discovered. Well, we've always supposed that that would be an invitation to students to get together and produce what was wanted. And we very much think that that is the most likely explanation of how this came into being.
Professor Bolton was a very charismatic man. After I read his lectures, I wanted to go out and find the plate of brass. I can't give you his exact words, but the ending of his speech was of the order of, "The plate is there, now go out and find it."
The Natural History Museum in London is home to the world's most famous collection of scientific specimens. The material kept here has provided science with the information on which the natural history of the planet has been written. Specimens like this fly encased in amber, resin which solidified 40 million years ago. Since it emerged from the collection of the German entomologist Hermann Loew in 1850, it's been regarded as a prize exhibit. For the insect inside this amber, is a member of the housefly family, which still exists today. Scientists were amazed to find it had been around so long, and the natural history of flies was revised to include this rare discovery. Until one day a student was hired to classify the museum's amber collection. Andrew Ross was using a lamp at the time.
And I thought, wow, amazing specimen. And then suddenly a crack appeared around the fly, just around here. And it's actually caused by a gentle warmth from the microscope lamp that I was using. And this had me very worried because it's such an important specimen and a crack suddenly appearing around it. And I thought, oh no, now what do I do? And I quickly put it away and hoped no one would notice it. But then I thought, no, that's a bit strange, it shouldn't be doing that. And then I looked at the slide from the side, and then everything became clear. Because someone had taken a piece of amber, they cut it in half, hollowed a piece out, put a fly in some kind of modern resin, and glued the two bits back together.
The fact that it was a common housefly should have alerted the experts.
The fly they chose is a species called Phanius scalaris, known as the latrine fly because it lives around toilets. And it's a very advanced fly, and 150 years ago there's probably hundreds of them flying around. And it's probably just the nearest fly to hand, perhaps lying on a windowsill somewhere.
His discovery solved two problems troubling entomologists. Why was this the only living species to be found as a fossil, and why had no other prehistoric latrine flies been found?
It's quite satisfying to find that an important specimen is a fake. And actually, this solved a lot of problems because many entomologists have used this particular species as an example of how long species of flies can live for. And they argued that the fossil record of insects was very poor because there's only the one specimen, and there should be millions of others preserved in resin that are still living today. But we now know that the fossil record is much better, and all the insects preserved in amber are extinct.
In science, accusations of fraud and fakery usually have two results. One is heated argument. The other is a thorough and often agonized reassessment of what were thought established facts. This was certainly true in 1985 when Sir Fred Hoyle and other eminent scientists claimed that one of the most important fossils ever discovered was a fake. It's called Archaeopteryx, and for more than a century it had been hailed as the vital missing link between dinosaurs and modern birds. Suddenly, it looked as though all the textbooks on evolution would have to be rewritten.
Curiously, all the Archaeopteryx fossils have been found in one small corner of southern Germany, around this stone quarry at Solnhofen. The story goes that in 1861, the first specimen appeared when a quarry workman split a limestone slab. Over the years, a handful of other Archaeopteryx fossils emerged from the rock. From them, the experts reconstructed this extraordinary creature. Hailed as the missing link between dinosaurs and modern birds, it was thought to have flown 150 million years ago. Fossil hunters believe the bones survived for two reasons. The first was that they fell to their deaths in prehistoric slime.
150 million years ago, this area here was a shallow sea with lagoons at their edges. Scientists suppose that Archaeopteryx has been living nearby, naturally on trees or bushes, on land, but perhaps by thunderstorms had been driven into the sea and was drowned.
The fossils were also preserved because the mud solidified to the hardest of limestones.
Archaeopteryx has been well preserved only here up to now because this stone is so hard and has not been attacked by nature.
Those who believe that all the Archaeopteryx fossils are fake point to another characteristic of the stone. It's so finely grained that it produces the best lithographic plates. Artists can etch the most detailed pictures on them. Hoax theorists argue that a 19th century fossil hunter engraved an Archaeopteryx. In Canada, one investigator believes the essential ingredient for the hoax can be found in anyone's back garden. Craig Willis thinks he knows exactly what the 19th century forger did. Willis spotted 3 things that alerted him. The first was about the feathers.
All of the specimens of the Archaeopteryx exhibit impressions of feathers which are typical of modern birds that are capable of flight. And the feature that stands out the most is the fact that they all exhibit this off-center quill or this asymmetric design, which is characteristic of the flight feathers of all modern birds.
Also, the Archaeopteryx did not seem to have the bone structure of a creature that could fly.
Not a single one of these exhibited the characteristic breastbone, which is the point of attachment for the huge flight muscles required for flapping flight.
Finally, Willis argued that the bones lay flat in the stone. A 3-dimensional creature should have produced a 3-dimensional fossil. To make his fake fossil, he needs some Solnhofen limestone and some chemicals. All these were available in the mid-19th century when Archaeopteryx appeared. First, he rubs a fine powder from the limestone block. He now adds sodium silicate. He believes this is the crucial ingredient. It makes the powdered rock reset into stone indistinguishable from the original.
What I'm going to do basically is make an impression of this surface of the feather.
A hoaxer would have greased the feather so that no traces of down remained to give the game away.
And just apply a few drops of the sodium silicate to the surface. And I just take the tip of my finger and I make a nice feather-sized puddle. And with the powdered limestone, which I've already prepared, I just add it. I then take the feather and place the feather onto the surface of the mixture. Like so.
Once the feather is clamped into the artificial mud, it takes only minutes to set before Willis can check on his work.
Now, once the feather has been actually carefully peeled away from the surface, there are a couple of features that are striking. In terms of the texture and the color of the synthetic stone, it's virtually indistinguishable from the background. And if you get up very close to it using a good quality magnifier, such as a jeweler's lens, it's quite easy to detect all of the very finest detail of the structure of the feathers, such as have been noted by investigators who have actually examined the Archaeopteryx fossils under a scanning electron microscope.
Comparison with the Archaeopteryx fossil confirms Willis's belief.
I'm absolutely convinced that all of the Archaeopteryx, or the alleged Archaeopteryx fossils, were absolutely brilliantly executed forgeries using a process, if not identical to the one that I've just described, and in all its basic features, very, very similar.
But back at the Solnhofen quarry, they don't believe that Willis and the critics have cracked the case. Only 2 years ago, this quarryman discovered the world's 7th Archaeopteryx. He says it was in a place no forger could have got into, deep inside a limestone block.
I was working away with hammer and chisel, and I was throwing away material we couldn't use. As I was doing so, I realized there was a fossil in this stone. I recognized it as an Archaeopteryx by the number of its claws. A dinosaur has 5 claws, and an Archaeopteryx only 3.
When they're trying to work out whether a find is genuine, archaeologists always check to make sure that there's nothing suspicious about the circumstances of its discovery. So when, in 1911, 2 English schoolboys claimed that they'd found a masterpiece of prehistoric art during a break from class, it's not surprising that at first, investigators thought the lads had cooked up an elaborate practical joke.
The Sherborne bone is on its way from London to the MacDonald Archaeological Institute in Cambridge. To scientists' amazement, it's taken 80 years to establish the truth. Its latest investigator is Dr. Francesco Derrico.
So I brought from the Natural History Museum the Sherborne bone with the engraving of a horse, as you can see. And please have a look at it.
On the bone is a carving of a horse's head. It's been claimed that the bone and the carving are as much as 10,000 years old. The story began early this century at a boys' public school in Dorset. Sherborne became the unwitting focus for this long-running archaeological mystery. The Sherborne bone was apparently discovered in a quarry in the school's grounds. Retired Sherborne master Jim Gibb has followed the twists and turns of the controversy.
In 1911, two new boys went for a walk up to the quarries and found this bone with a horse's head scratched on it. They took it to their day room in the house. Older boys rubbished it, and Cortese, one of the new boys who found it, decided to throw it into the fire. He was stopped by an older boy who said, "Give it to the science master. It's probably genuine."
The science master did indeed wonder if the bone might be genuine. He took it to be examined by experts at the British Museum. They declared it was the work of Stone Age man, but not everyone was convinced. 15 years after the bone was found, the first doubts were emerging when an Oxford scientist, Professor Sollas, said he suspected it was a schoolboy hoax after all. The debate has continued over decades. Now, Dr. Robert Krasinski of the Natural History Museum in London is hoping for a verdict from Dr. Derrico.
Tell me what you can see, what you can conclude about it.
Well, we have a number of things to look at to try to check the authenticity of the engravings. The shape of the engravings and differences in patina.
The patina is the surface texture of the bone, and Dr. Derrico knows if the bone and the carving are the same age, the patina will be uniform. But if the carving is more modern, differences will show. The carved lines will be covered in much less sediment than the rest of the bone.
They don't seem to contain any traces of the sediment.
You don't see any patina where you have the incised lines?
No, the line seems clear, even quite white, and the surface of the bone is light brown.
Right.
So the difference of patina here is not a good indication for the authenticity of the engraving. But I think we have to do something more to be sure of it.
The bone and the carving are of different ages. The museum turned to Oxford University. It has one of the world's leading carbon-14 dating laboratories. Scientists regard this as probably the most accurate method available. The bone was sent to Dr. Robert Hedges.
When we were given the Sherborne bone, our aim is to date the time when the animal whose bone it was living. This is the powder that we would take from the bone to begin with, and that bone powder contains some protein. We can extract the protein, which is a very tiny amount, and this very tiny amount of protein contains the original carbon atoms that were part of the animal when it was alive. And it's in these carbon atoms that we measure how much radiocarbon still survives. And the amount that survives tells us how long ago the animal lived. The longer ago, the less the radiocarbon. Well, we found that the bone was about 600 years old. And of course, this means it's much too young to have been covered with an engraving made in Paleolithic times. So it must have been done very, very much more recently than that.
At Sherborne, Jim Gibb accepts the verdict of science, but he still has faith in the integrity of the two boys who found the bone.
I think the whole thing was done by older boys, probably only a year or two older. They knew a bit about Paleolithic art because the science master had lectured on it, and the history of the story, I think, makes it genuine. But of course, I was wrong.
Though museum curators may lose sleep worrying if their exhibits are fakes, I think the rest of us secretly enjoy the idea that perhaps we're being conned. That's why some artists who fake paintings only become successful when they're caught, like the British painter Tom Keating, whose fraudulent old masters came to be valued almost as highly as the real things, which all goes to show that the pleasure provided by a truly ingenious hoax can be absolutely genuine.